I woke up to the sound of my own gate rattling like it was trying to shake itself free from the hinges. At first, I thought it was the wind, until I saw her, Karen, our self-appointed neighborhood monarch, standing in my driveway with a shiny padlock in her hand, snapping it onto my gate as if she was fortifying a castle wall. My dog barked, my coffee sloshed, and I stood frozen at the window, watching a woman who had no legal authority casually lock me inside my own property. She spotted me and gave a little smirk, that smug twist of the lips she always wore whenever she thought she'd outmaneuvered me. She shouted something about community standards and unauthorized landscaping equipment, as though those words were magic spells that justified chaining people into their homes. I didn't answer. I just stared at the brand-new lock hanging from my gate, my stomach equal parts boiling anger and disbelief. Who does this? Who wakes up on a Tuesday morning and decides their neighbor's freedom of movement is their business? The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. But then I realized the deeper problem. If she thought she could lock me in once, she'd think she could do it again. She wasn't just challenging me, she was escalating. This wasn't about the HOA or my yard, or whatever petty excuse she used this time. This was about control. I slipped on my boots and walked calmly outside. She stayed by the curb, phone in hand, already dialing, her voice loud enough for me to hear the words, trespassing and police. Imagine that. I was trespassing on my own property because she had decided the gate belonged to her authority. I didn't say anything as I crouched down and examined the lock. Shiny, brand new, expensive. A petty little trophy. By the time the squad car rolled up, Karen had worked herself into full-blown outrage, pacing dramatically and gesturing toward me like she was reporting a fugitive. The officers got out, clearly trying not to roll their eyes. They listened to her rant about how I was a menace to the community, how my gate was non-compliant, how I had been warned I hadn't. They finally turned to me, asking if I wanted to explain. I kept my voice calm, controlled, the kind of calm that makes people nervous. I simply pointed at the lock and said, "That's not mine. It's on my property." And she put it there without my consent. The officers exchanged a glance. Karen squawked like a parrot, insisting that it was temporary, that it was to protect the neighborhood, that the HOA had mandated it. But when pressed for paperwork, proof, or literally anything beyond her voice, she came up empty. Her cheeks flushed, her words tangled. The officers gave me the universal, "We're not getting involved in this circus," shrug. That was when I decided. I walked back to my garage, pulled out my bolt cutters, and strolled to the gate as though I were about to trim a bush. Karen screamed, actually screamed, like I was dismantling the very foundations of democracy. The cops didn't move. One of them leaned against the car, arms crossed, as if waiting to see what would happen. I clipped the lock in one swift motion. The metal snapped, clean and sharp, echoing louder than her shouting. I held the broken lock up, dangling it by my fingertips, and said, "This belongs to you. Don't leave your property on mine again." Then I tossed it gently onto the pavement at her feet. Her jaw worked up and down like she was trying to chew her own words. The officers mumbled something about civil dispute, and suggested she take it up with the HOA. They got back in their car, and within seconds, the patrol lights were gone, leaving me standing there with Karen vibrating in rage like a kettle left too long on the stove. That was when I knew the real war had just started. She hadn't expected me to cut the lock, at least not in front of the police. She thought fear of authority would make me hesitate. But I didn't hesitate, and now she looked exposed. Cornered. And people like her don't retreat quietly. They double down. I could see it in her eyes as she picked up the broken lock. She wasn't done. She was already calculating her next move. And for the first time, I found myself almost looking forward to it. Because if she wanted a battle of wills, I had patience she couldn't even begin to fathom. And so the stage was set. One entitled neighbor, one quiet homeowner, and one gate that had just become ground zero for a war neither of us was willing to lose. The morning after the lock incident, I half expected Karen to be camped outside my gate with a folding chair and a clipboard, ready to hurl accusations at passing joggers about how I had committed a felony by destroying her hardware. Instead, her house sat quiet and shuttered, blinds drawn tight. It was eerie, like she was retreating to her bunker, preparing for the next strike. That alone told me more than if she had marched over immediately. Karen wasn't done, she was calculating. Sure enough, by afternoon, I discovered her retaliation. My mailbox was stuffed with HOA violation notices. Not one or two, but a dozen, all identical, all accusing me of everything from improper gate structure, to unauthorized lawn modifications, to the vague but somehow damning disruptive property conduct. It didn't take a genius to realize she'd spammed me with every possible citation she could think of, hoping to drown me in paper. The HOA letterhead looked official enough, but the signatures were suspiciously inconsistent, and some of the language, phrases like "this will not stand" and "community harmony must prevail," sounded more like Karen's dramatic flair than any legal text. I took the stack inside, spread it out on the kitchen table, and poured myself a drink. The game had escalated, just as I predicted. But here's the thing about HOA rules. They're enforceable only when there's actual backing from the board, and Karen, for all her bluster, wasn't the board. She was just one loudmouth with a shaky grip on authority. She wanted me to panic. She wanted me to think I was at risk of losing my home over some trumped-up nonsense. Instead, I calmly documented every single letter, photographed them, and filed them away. That evening, I saw her out front talking to neighbors. She wasn't just gossiping, she was campaigning. Every wide gesture of her arms, every dramatic tilt of her head was part of a performance, painting me as some menace who refused to respect the rules. A couple of neighbors looked uncomfortable, others nodded, and one or two even glanced toward my house with something like sympathy. I realized she wasn't just trying to punish me, she was trying to isolate me, turn the neighborhood into a jury box where she was both prosecutor and judge. The next day, things got stranger. A bright orange sticker was slapped on my fence, warning me of a supposed HOA inspection scheduled for the weekend. Except there was no date, no inspector's name, no contact information. Just the word "mandatory" in all caps, underlined 3 times. I pulled it off, shaking my head. If Karen wanted to play bureaucracy cosplay, I was fine letting her dig her own hole. But when I turned the corner, I caught sight of her car parked crooked across her driveway, and there she was in the front seat, camera in hand, snapping photos of me as if I were a criminal under surveillance. That was the moment I decided to stop simply reacting. I had to set the tone. So, I called the actual HOA office. A polite woman answered, and when I explained the bizarre flood of violation notices and fake inspection warnings, she sighed audibly. I wasn't the first to complain about Karen's antics. She confirmed none of the paperwork was legitimate, that no inspection was scheduled, and she encouraged me to keep documenting everything. "Trust me," she said, her voice heavy with experience. "She's been warned before. But a paper trail helps." I hung up, oddly reassured. Karen might have influence with neighbors, but she didn't have real power. That distinction mattered. Saturday rolled around, and I made sure to spend it outside, mowing the lawn, cleaning the driveway, trimming the hedges. Everything visibly compliant, nothing remotely in violation. It wasn't for me. It was theater, my own performance staged for the neighborhood audience Karen had been cultivating. Sure enough, she came striding out with her phone, narrating loudly about unauthorized hedge height, as though she were hosting a reality TV show. A couple of neighbors slowed their dog walks to watch. I didn't look at her. I just kept working, calm, deliberate, efficient. When I finished, I wiped my hands, pulled out my own phone, and snapped a single photo of her filming me. No words exchanged, no arguments. Just evidence. That photo turned out to be the first crack in her armor. The next day, she posted a rant on the neighborhood Facebook group, complete with shaky videos of me, destroying property boundaries, by trimming my own hedge. But instead of rallying support, the comments section turned against her. Neighbors asked why she was filming me. Others pointed out that my yard looked great. A few even called her obsessive, suggesting maybe she should focus on her own property. Watching her unravel online was satisfying, but it also made her dangerous. Public embarrassment is a fuel for people like Karen, and it drove her straight into her next move. She called the police again. This time, she accused me of illegal destruction of HOA property because I had cut down community landscaping. When the officers arrived, they looked tired before they even stepped out of the car. They asked me a few questions, listened to Karen's melodramatic monologue about how I had endangered neighborhood harmony, then finally asked her to show them the supposed destroyed community property. She marched them right to my freshly trimmed hedge. One officer bent down, touched the leaves, and straightened up with a deadpan look. "Ma'am, this is his hedge. It's inside his property line." Karen sputtered. She insisted the hedge was a visual boundary that belonged to the community. The officers exchanged a look, thanked me for my cooperation, and gently suggested to her that repeated false reports could result in consequences. They left, and she was left standing there, red-faced, her authority crumbling in real time. That night, though, as I locked up, I noticed something that sent a chill through me. A fresh padlock, this time not on my gate, but on my backyard shed. A shed that contained my tools, my lawnmower, and, most importantly, the bolt cutters I had used to free my gate. Karen wasn't retreating. She was escalating again. And this time, she had crossed from absurdity into outright trespass. I stared at the lock in the moonlight, the air still and heavy, my mind already calculating my next move. If she wanted to wage war with locks, then fine. I'd show her how a war like that really ends. When I found the new lock on my shed, I didn't react right away. I didn't storm over to her house or start shouting across the street like she probably hoped. No, I stood there with the cool night air pressing against my skin and just studied it. It was the same style as the one she had slapped on my gate. Thick, shiny, smugly new, like a badge of her self-proclaimed authority. She had walked onto my property, trespassed into my backyard, and locked up my tools. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. This was sabotage. The next morning, I called a locksmith. Not because I couldn't cut the lock myself, but because I wanted a paper trail. The locksmith examined it, raised an eyebrow, and asked if I had the key. I explained calmly that the lock wasn't mine. He snorted, muttered something about crazy neighbors, and sliced through it in less than a minute. I paid him, took the receipt, and filed it away with the growing mountain of evidence I was building. Every move she made against me became a brick in the case I was quietly constructing. By noon, Karen was at it again, this time pacing up and down the sidewalk in front of my house, shouting about how I was tampering with HOA security measures. I didn't engage. Instead, I set up my phone on a tripod in the window and recorded her little performance. At one point, she actually held up her own padlock key, waved it like a badge, and yelled, "This proves it was authorized." Which only proved one thing: she had installed it herself. The real twist came later that afternoon when a man in a button-down shirt and khakis showed up at my door. He introduced himself as Mr. Carter, the actual HOA president. His tone was polite, but there was weariness in his eyes. He had clearly dealt with Karen before. "I've received several complaints this week," he said, "most of them from the same source. I just wanted to see for myself what's going on." I led him around the property, showing him the bolt cutters, the locksmith receipt, the pile of fake violation letters, and the photo of Karen snapping pictures from her car. He shook his head slowly, muttering, "We've warned her so many times. She just doesn't know where the line is." Then, as if on cue, Karen herself stormed across the street, waving her arms. She launched into a tirade about how I was a danger to the community, that my hedge trimming violated aesthetic guidelines, that my shed was harboring unsafe equipment. Mr. Carter held up his hand, silencing her. His voice stayed calm but firm. Karen, enough. This isn't an HOA issue. You don't have the authority to lock up someone else's property. The look on her face was priceless, caught between outrage and betrayal. She tried to argue, but Carter cut her off. If you continue this behavior, the board will have no choice but to fine you. He's within his rights. For a moment, I thought that might be the end of it. But Karen doesn't lose gracefully. As Carter walked back to his car, she turned to me with a hiss only I could hear. You think you're clever. But I'll find a way. You'll slip up. Her eyes burned with the promise of escalation. And slip up was exactly what she tried to engineer. 2 days later, I came home to find a city code enforcement officer standing in my driveway, clipboard in hand. Karen was hovering nearby, pretending to trim her roses while eavesdropping. The officer explained there had been an anonymous complaint about unpermitted construction on my property. Apparently, Karen had reported my shed as a new illegal structure. I invited him to take a look. He measured, checked the property line, even peeked inside. The shed had been there for over a decade, built by the previous homeowner, and it was perfectly legal. The officer closed his clipboard and told me I was fine. Karen, lurking within earshot, practically vibrated with frustration. But here's where it got interesting. The officer mentioned that filing false complaints could carry penalties. He didn't say it loudly, but he said it just loud enough for Karen to hear. Her face flushed crimson. That night, she retaliated in a new way. I heard clanking outside around midnight. When I peeked out, I caught her dragging a folding chair onto the sidewalk, setting up what looked like a stakeout post directly across from my driveway. She actually sat there, bundled in a blanket, sipping coffee from a thermos, watching my house like she was on neighborhood patrol. I let her sit. I let her stew. I even made sure to leave my outdoor lights on so her vigil was visible to the entire block. By morning, a few neighbors had stopped to gawk. Someone snapped a photo. By evening, the picture was circulating in the community group chat with sarcastic captions like Karen's Homeland Security and Neighborhood Watch, Extreme Edition. Humiliation only made her bolder. The following weekend, she called the police again, this time claiming I had threatened her with tools. The officers arrived, weary as ever, and asked for details. She spun a tale about me, menacingly waving bolt cutters at her across the property line. I calmly invited them inside, showed them the time-stamped video from my tripod, which captured the exact moment she had been yelling outside while I was indoors sipping tea. The officers gave her a warning right there on the sidewalk. If she continued filing false reports, she could face charges for misuse of emergency services. Neighbors who had gathered to watch actually clapped when the cruisers pulled away. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the breaking point. But no, Karen's pride couldn't survive being dismissed so publicly. The very next morning, I opened my gate to leave for work and found the hinges jammed with superglue. The metal stuck, gummed up, refusing to swing open. It took me 20 minutes and a can of solvent to free it. My anger flared, but beneath it was something else, determination. She had moved from locks to sabotage, and sabotage could be proven. So I installed cameras, discreet, high-resolution, motion-activated. One aimed at the gate, another at the shed, and a third watching the front walk. I didn't tell anyone. I just waited. And within 48 hours, the cameras caught her in full HD, creeping onto my property under cover of night, clutching another shiny padlock in her hand. She glanced around, crouched by the shed, and fumbled with the latch. The footage was crystal clear. Her face, her key, her actions. Evidence that went far beyond hearsay. When I watched it back, I knew this was the moment. I had her. The question wasn't whether I could stop her. It was how I wanted to end this. Quietly, with a formal complaint? Or loudly, with a public showdown she couldn't spin away from? Because something in me, after weeks of her games, wanted the latter. When I finally had Karen on camera trespassing, I felt an almost electric calm settle over me. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was the clarity of knowing the balance had shifted. 4 weeks she'd been poking, sabotaging, twisting narratives, hiding behind HOA jargon and bogus authority. But now I had proof. Actual, undeniable proof. And the beauty of it was that she didn't know yet. She was still operating under the illusion that she was untouchable. I spent the next morning casually tending to my yard while she lurked from across the street, pretending to water her already drenched begonias. I waved at her, cheerful as sunshine. The suspicion in her eyes was delicious. She didn't understand why I wasn't angry, why I wasn't storming over to accuse her of the midnight sabotage. She didn't realize she had already lost. That evening, I sent the footage, unedited, time-stamped, crystal clear, to Mr. Carter, the HOA president, along with copies of every fake violation notice, the locksmith receipt, and the police reports. His response came within hours. "Thank you. This will be addressed immediately." No hedging, no bureaucracy. Just quiet acknowledgement that the storm she had whipped up was about to turn on her. But I wasn't done. I had one more card to play. I forwarded the footage to the City Code Enforcement Office, attaching a brief, factual note. Unlawful trespass and tampering with private property. They didn't reply right away, but I knew I had just set gears in motion. The next morning, a patrol car returned, except this time, it wasn't because Karen called. It was for her. The officers knocked on her door, and from my porch, I watched the entire scene unfold like theater. She came out in her robe, feigning confusion, clutching her phone like a weapon. Her voice carried down the street as she insisted she was the victim, that she had been protecting the neighborhood, that I was lying. The officers calmly explained they had video evidence. Evidence that showed her placing a lock on my shed in the middle of the night. Neighbors started gathering, one by one, drawn by the sight of flashing lights. Some stood with folded arms, others whispered. A few openly smirked. When the officers told her that further incidents could result in trespassing charges, her voice cracked. She tried to pivot into tears, but it wasn't working. The audience wasn't buying it. That night, she retaliated the only way she knew how. Another Facebook post, this one a rambling manifesto about how I was orchestrating a smear campaign against her, how the HOA president was corrupt, how the police were ignoring community safety. She even uploaded blurry screenshots of her own Ring doorbell camera, circling me in the background like she was building a conspiracy case. But something shifted. The comments weren't on her side anymore. Neighbors who had once nodded politely now pushed back. "Karen, you can't just lock people's stuff. He has the right to his property. You need to let this go." The more she ranted, the worse it looked. By morning, half her post was gone, deleted in a frantic attempt to erase the backlash. Still, I knew her pride wouldn't let her stop. Sure enough, 2 days later, the escalation took a bizarre turn. I woke up to find caution tape strung across my driveway. Real yellow tape, the kind police use. Only this wasn't from the authorities. It was cheap plastic from a hardware store, tied sloppily to my fence post. A handwritten sign flapped in the breeze. Under investigation by HOA. I laughed out loud. It was so absurd it almost looped back around to genius. Almost. Neighbors walking by stared at the tape and shook their heads. One even snapped a photo and texted it to me with a single line. "She's lost it." I didn't touch the tape. Not right away. Instead, I called Carter and asked him to stop by. When he arrived and saw the spectacle, his jaw clenched. He ripped the tape down himself, muttering about board sanctions. Karen came barreling out of her house, shrieking that I was tampering with an official investigation. Carter turned to her, voice hard as steel. "This is your final warning. One more stunt, and we'll fine you the maximum. And don't think we won't." Her face went white. Not because she believed him, but because she finally realized the HOA wasn't backing her anymore. That night, my cameras caught something I didn't expect. Not Karen sneaking onto my property this time, but Karen meeting with another neighbor, a man 2 houses down, known for being easily swayed by drama. They huddled on her porch, whispering, gesturing toward my house. She was trying to recruit allies, rebuild her crumbling empire. So I prepared my counterstrike. The following weekend, I hosted a barbecue. Nothing flashy, nothing confrontational. Just burgers, hot dogs, open invitation to anyone in the neighborhood who wanted to stop by. I made sure the lawn was immaculate, the gate wide open, the atmosphere welcoming. People came. They ate, laughed, mingled. And they saw with their own eyes that I wasn't the menace Karen painted me to be. They saw that my violations were nonsense. They saw me as part of the community. Karen, of course, stood on her porch the entire time, glaring, arms folded, watching her influence crumble in real time. Every laugh that drifted her way was another nail in the coffin of her control. And then came the biggest twist yet. Monday morning, a city inspector, this time an actual one, showed up. Clipboard, badge, official demeanor. Apparently, they had received a string of anonymous complaints about my property. Again. Karen's doing, obviously. But instead of siding with her, the inspector checked the footage I had emailed weeks earlier. He confirmed that the lock incident was under review as a criminal trespass. Karen didn't know I had looped the city in. She didn't realize the lock wasn't just an HOA problem anymore. It was a legal one. When she saw the inspector on my property, she came striding over, triumphant, only to stop cold when he told her point blank, "Ma'am, you need to leave. This visit doesn't concern you." The look on her face was almost worth the weeks of chaos. Almost. But the real payoff came when the inspector told me quietly, "If she does this again, press charges. You have enough evidence." That night, as the sun dipped low, I stood in my yard and looked across at Karen's house. Curtains drawn, lights dim, her silhouette pacing like a caged tiger. She was losing grip fast. But the thing about people like her is they don't go quietly. They lash out. They gamble everything on one last move. And I knew, absolutely knew, that she wasn't finished. I could feel it building, like static in the air before a storm. The kind of storm that doesn't just rattle windows, it tears the roof right off. The storm came 3 nights later. I was halfway through a late movie when I heard the unmistakable clang of metal against my gate. My stomach tightened, but my face stayed calm as I muted the TV and slipped quietly to the window. There she was, in the beam of my motion light, Karen, disheveled, hair wild, her face set with manic determination. And in her hand? Another lock. Not just any lock this time, but a heavy-duty chain she was looping through my gate as though she were sealing a vault. She worked fast, glancing over her shoulder, muttering to herself. This wasn't smug entitlement anymore. This was desperation. She yanked the chain tight, snapped the lock shut, and stepped back, breathing hard. For a second, she stood there admiring her handiwork, like an artist pleased with a finished painting. Then she pulled out her phone and started dialing, probably preparing to summon the police to admire her evidence. What she didn't know was that every second was being captured in razor-sharp clarity by the cameras I had installed. Different angles, multiple timestamps, irrefutable proof. She might have thought she was playing her final card, but in reality, she was dealing me a royal flush. I stepped outside, calm as ever. The air was cool, the night quiet except for the sound of crickets, and Karen's frantic voice as she shouted into her phone about how I was illegally barricading community access. When she saw me approaching, she flinched, then tried to cover by straightening her shoulders and raising her chin. "You're caught now," she snapped. "The police are coming. You'll see." I didn't argue. I didn't even look at the chain she had just fastened. Instead, I simply leaned against the fence, hands in my pockets, and said, "Good. We'll wait together." The minutes stretched long. She fidgeted, paced, muttered. I stayed still, letting her unravel. Finally, the familiar flash of red and blue filled the street. 2 officers stepped out, the same ones who had been here before, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and grim amusement. Karen launched into her monologue, pointing at the chain like it was the smoking gun. He's blocked community access, he's violating safety standards, this is a danger to everyone. The officer held up a hand. Ma'am, please step aside. He turned to me. Sir. Wordlessly, I pulled out my phone, opened the app, and played the footage. Karen's face appeared on the screen, her chaining the gate, her snapping the lock shut, her admiring her work. The officers watched in silence, their faces tightening. Then one of them looked at her, his voice flat. Ma'am, you put this lock on? Her voice cracked. No. That's fake. He edited that. The other officer gestured at the live feed still rolling from my camera, showing her standing right there beside the freshly locked gate. It's live, ma'am. You're on it right now. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by her sputtering. Then came the words I had been waiting for. Ma'am, you're under arrest for trespassing and criminal mischief. The neighbors had come out by then, drawn by the lights. Doors opened, porches filled, whispers spread. They watched as Karen shrieked, struggled, pleaded, and was finally cuffed. Her cries of "This is my community!" echoed down the street, shrill and hollow. The officers guided her into the cruiser, and just like that, the Queen of Locks was gone, her empire collapsed in the blink of an eye. But the story didn't end there. The next week, the HOA held an emergency meeting. The room buzzed with energy as neighbors filled the chairs, eager to discuss the chaos that had consumed our block. Mr. Carter opened the floor, his voice steady but stern. He laid out the facts. Repeated harassment, fake notices, sabotage, misuse of HOA authority. He even played snippets of the footage I had provided. By the time he finished, the room was buzzing, not with sympathy for Karen, but with outrage at her behavior. The vote was swift. She was fined the maximum allowed under the bylaws, stripped of any committee involvement, and formally censured. It wasn't exile, but it was a public declaration that her reign was over. Walking out of that meeting, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. Not triumph, not gloating, just the quiet relief of knowing the game was done. The war was finished, the gate was mine again, and Karen's power had been dismantled by nothing more than patience, evidence, and a refusal to be baited. But the real payoff came a few days later. I was mowing the lawn when a neighbor I barely knew stopped by. She smiled, handed me a plate of cookies, and said, "Thanks for standing up to her. You made it easier for all of us." That's when I realized the truth. This hadn't just been my fight. Everyone on the block had been living under Karen's shadow, tolerating her antics, hoping to avoid becoming her next target. By standing my ground, I hadn't just freed myself, I'd freed the neighborhood. As for Karen, her house grew quieter. Curtains drawn, no more theatrics on the sidewalk, no more manifestos online. Word was she was considering selling, though no one knew for sure. All I knew was that the locks were gone, the caution tape was gone, and the only thing left rattling my gate was the wind. Sometimes, people ask if I regret cutting off that first lock in front of the police. If it made things worse, if I should have ignored it. I always smile and give the same answer. That lock was never about the gate. It was about control. And once you give someone like Karen control, you'll never get it back. So I cut it off. And I'd do it again. Because the truth is, some battles are worth fighting, not with shouting, not with rage, but with patience, proof, and just enough stubbornness to see it through.